Hello everyone, Clayton here at worked.Our, and today we'll be taking a look at, and I'll show you how we installed Roadmaster's diode wiring kit on our 2020 Honda Accord. Now our diode kit is going to allow us to use our RV's turn, stop, and taillight signals and send those back to our vehicle. Now we always have to travel with lighting on the back of our vehicle, and the diode kits are a great option because we don't have to have any magnetic lights or anything sticking on the back of our Accord. And we also don't have to use a bulb and socket kit, so we don't have to drill into our factory taillight housing. And in this case, we didn't have a whole lot of extra room, so the bulb and socket kit wouldn't have worked. Our diode wiring is one of the key components in our flat towing setup. We have, of course, our diode wiring, our safety cables, our tow bar, and our base plate. And in this case, we don't have a supplemental braking system, but I would suggest adding one. This is going to be the only visible part of our diode wiring outside of the vehicle. There's an umbilical cord that runs from the 7-way on our motorhome to the plug on the front of our Accord. Our kit is going to include this plug that mounts on the front of our vehicle for our umbilical cord wiring to plug in. This will get power back to our diodes in the back of our Accord. We get to utilize our factory wiring to get our stop, turn, and taillight signals back to our vehicle. We just have to take out our taillights, install a couple of diodes, and that's how we get all of our signals back to our taillights. Our factory circuit is going to be completed when we're using our diodes, and then when power comes through that 4-pole wiring harness that we wire through our car, it allows us to get our signal from the RV. In terms of installation, getting the diodes installed is not too bad. We did have to remove our rear fascia just to get enough room to actually mount our diodes, as it is pretty tight, like I said, behind our taillights. So I've gone over some of the features and how they work. Now I'll show you how we got ours installed. In our flat tow setup, we just installed our base plate, so our fascia is already off. If you're coming back to do the wiring, I suggest taking your fascia off. It'll just make it a lot easier to route our wires and actually get it up here to our base plate. Now to start, I'm going to grab our wiring, come around our base plate here, and just tie it off. That way we have a lot extra up here in the front. We don't have to worry about being short up here whenever we make our connection to our plug. Now I'm just going to drop our wiring down and then run it underneath our vehicle, and I'll show you how we did that. Running all of our wiring back to the back was pretty easy because there's a lot of underbody panels. Our wiring comes up here around our base plate and then dumps out right here. I went ahead and put some wire loom on there just to protect it from rubbering on our base plate, and then it comes down this way, and then I pulled it out down here, zip tied it to our cross member here, and ran it down our underbody panel all the way down this way, and it comes all the way through here, and then under this plastic. I pulled our wiring out of our plastic here, ran it up over this cross member, and then followed it all the way over this way, then tucked it up against our exhaust hanger, and then I ran it up over our heat shield and pulled it out back here. And it's very important to stay away from anything hot or moving when you're running our wiring. Now we can go ahead and lower down our car and take out our taillights and figure out where we're going to pull our wiring up through to make that connection. I'm going to separate our wires. We need our yellow and our brown wire to go up to our driver's side taillight. I'll go ahead and separate these now. All we're going to do is pull our wiring off of here. Our white wire will be for ground, and our green wire will run to our passenger side. To remove our taillight, I'm just going to pull this molding off here and make it a little bit easier to work with our plastic. We can grab our pry tool. Carefully, I'm going to pry out on this. Same thing up here. It'll pull out real nicely. Now we can grab our Phillips head screwdriver and take out these screws. Now there's only going to be 2 screws that we have to remove. And then we can grab our taillight. You kind of want to push out and pull. Again, you want to be careful not to break any plastic. Just like that. We can grab our taillight assembly. Then we can pull out our wiring harness here. We can use our pry tool to undo our wiring harness here. This can be kind of tough because you do have to hold on to your headlight or taillight. And then we can grab our plug here. We'll push down like this and pull out. we can set our taillight in the trunk. Before we pull our wiring up, I'm going to go ahead and strip this back. We'll have to grab a pair of snips and cut the plastic fastener off of our wiring harness. Then we'll pull off our electrical tape and trim back our sheathing. We're going to be using our gray wire for our stop and turn signal. We're going to be using our light blue wire for our taillight signal. And on the black and darker blue wire we're not using, I'm just going to add our sheathing back to it with some electrical tape, just to protect those wires long term. To get our wiring pulled up, I'm going to use an airline tube. There is a nice gap right down here. I'll just drop our airline tube down. And if you don't have an airline tube at home, that's fine. You could also use a string with a nut on the end. With our airline tube pulled down, we're ready to attach our brown and yellow wire and get that pulled up to make our connections. There actually isn't enough room for us to connect our diodes back here behind our taillight, so we are going to have to take our fascia off and make our connections down here. This will require us to extend these wires. Now I'll go ahead and show you how to remove your fascia. To start, we're going to have a 5mm Allen head right here. Go ahead and get that taken out. We're going to have 4 Phillips head screws here in our wheel well that we need to remove. We're going to start with this top one. It is kind of hard to see, and depending on your wheel size, it might even be hard to get to. And before we pop this fascia off, I'm just going to take some blues painter's tape and run along both sides of this seam. That way we don't scratch our paint when we're popping that fascia out. And we will repeat all the same processes over on our passenger side as far as removing our hardware and our taillight. Now we want to move our mud flap out of the way. There'll be one more Phillips head screw that we need to remove. Now when we go to remove our fascia, we want an extra set of hands on the other side. That way our bumper just doesn't fall off. We can pull our fascia straight out like this, and then we'll carefully pull out all the way up this way. Then we'll pull it off like this, working our way towards the center. We're going to have one push pin located right here. We're going to grab our pry tool and pry it down on our push pin. There is going to be one on each side. We are going to have one more push pin to undo on the bottom of our mud flap. We can set our mud flap off to the side and then remove our fascia. Then with all that undone, we can take our fascia off and set it off to the side. With our fascia off, we can go ahead and make all of our necessary connections. We are now going to want to separate our brown and our yellow wire. You can pull these apart. Just like so. We are going to have to extend these wires, as I previously said. That way we can make our connections and stick our diodes back here. So we just want to cut our wires. We're going to start with our light blue wire. We're going to strip it back. Actually, we'll strip it back a lot more, and then we'll double it over just to make sure it gets a really strong connection inside of our butt connector. So we'll twist it like so, and then fold it over and add a butt connector. So we'll stick our wire into the butt connector and crimp it down. Want to make sure we tug on it a little bit and make sure it's not going anywhere. We're only going to need about this much wire to get it extended. It's very important to make sure you're using a similar gauge wire as to what's on our wiring harness here. So we'll snip that. Strip it back just like we did the other side. We'll put our new wire into our butt connector, and then we'll grab our crimps and crimp it down. We'll want to repeat this same process for the rest of the wires that we cut. Then I'm just going to come back and add some electrical tape just to ensure that strong connection for a long time. Once we have our extensions done, we can tuck our wiring behind this bracket, and then I'm going to come back and zip tie all this just to clean it up and make it look nice. And then just to clarify, after making our extensions, our light blue wire is going to be for our taillight signal, and I wired that to a white wire. And then our gray signal is going to be for our stop and turn, and I extended that with a black wire. You do want to keep separate which ones go to the plug and which ones are coming from our harness. Now we want to grab our diodes and kind of figure out where we're going to stick these, because they do have two-sided tape. Right here is probably our best bet. And then we have our in signals here. We can have enough room to run all of our wiring down and make our correct connections. Our white wire here is going to be our tail light signal, and this one is coming from our harness. So when we make our connection, it will go to the blue spade connector on the in, and then our other white wire will go to the out. We'll go ahead and stick this onto our diode now so we don't get them confused in a few minutes. We'll grab our other white wire. This will be our out signal. We want to make sure it's tucked behind that bracket like I said. We can go ahead and strip it back. We'll add our other blue spade connector and crimp that down. Now we're going to go ahead and plug it into our diode. And when we plug these back in, this completes our factory circuit. Now we can add our diode wiring from our kit to this plug. We are actually going to use the extra brown wire that we had cut for a jumper wire. This is going to allow us to run our taillight signal over to the other side. So we're going to twist these together like this. Then we can add our yellow spade connector with the bigger opening. Go ahead and plug that in to our diode. We are now ready to do our stop and turn signal. We're going to use this yellow wire with those two black wires in the same order that we had done this diode. This wire was our out signal. I'm going to go ahead and stick that to our diode and our yellow wire as well. We can now grab that last in signal and plug it in to our other diode. Now we want to clean off our surfaces and mount our diodes right here to the body using that two-sided tape. And we do have a lot of loose wiring, so I'm just going to come back in and zip tie it all together to make sure it doesn't shift and that it looks nice and clean. We are now going to route our brown and our green wire over to the passenger side. There's a little bracket right here for this sensor. We are going to push our wiring up through that, like so. Now we can pull our wiring up and through. We're just going to route it right to here, and we're actually going to let this dangle for now until we make our extensions up here from our factory wiring harness. On the passenger side, we're going to be using our gray and purple wire. We can go ahead and tuck our brown and black wire back into our wiring harness, our sheathing, just like we did on the driver's side. Gray is going to be our stop and turn, and purple is going to be our taillight signal. We're going to extend these wires the exact same way that we did over on the driver's side. With our wires extended, we can now make all of our necessary connections to our diodes the same way that we did on the driver's side. Now we're going to go ahead, clean off our surface, and stick our diodes to the car just like we did on the other side. With our diodes stuck down, I'm going to grab some zip ties and just clean everything up, make sure it looks nice back here. We're now ready to use our white wire to make our ground. I'm going to go ahead and put it right here. This is a good spot because it's all metal and it's open behind here, so you don't have to worry about drilling into anything. You can grab our snips, again just measure it out, and cut it, strip it back. We can add our ring terminal, crimp it down, and come back with our self-tapper and mount it right here. With our ground ran and everything plugged in, we're going to go ahead, plug back in our taillights, hook up to our alternate power source, and test everything out before we put our fascia back on. That way if we do have to fix anything, we can easily access it. We'll go ahead and check our taillights. We'll flip to our left turn, then our brake lights. Now we can check our taillight signal on the passenger side, our brake light signal on the passenger side, and our right turn signal. So since everything's tested out and it works properly, we can go ahead and take our taillights back off and then reinstall our fascia and taillights in the reverse order that we took them apart. And with our rear fascia reinstalled, we can move up to the front, get our holes cut, and put our fascia back on. Now with our hole cut out, I'm ready to mount our plug to the front of our Accord. And before we add silicone and get everything all tidied up for good, I went ahead and added some extra wires just in case I want to add any accessory lines down the road. We do want to make sure to take our boot and slide that over our diode wiring. And then we can just push that back into the bumper for now. Then we can make our connections to our plug. They're all going to be labeled with which wire goes where. And before we push our boot onto our wiring, we do want to make sure to add black silicone to this side. Then when we push that boot on, we want to put black silicone on the back side. With our black silicone added, I'm going to run some electrical tape around everything just to ensure that this does not corrode. It keeps a good strong connection over time. We can now drill out our holes. I'm going to add a couple flat washers on the back side, and we can just use the hardware that was provided in our kit. With everything hooked up, tested out, it's hooked up to our RV and it's working as well, we know we're ready to hit the road and travel safely. That's going to do it for a look at installation of the Roadmaster Diode wiring kit on our 2020 Honda Accord.